Putin claims that a belligerent NATO forced his hand to invade Ukraine. He undoubtedly also feared an independent, democratic, and affluent Ukraine. But like a classical Greek drama, Putin has, by his actions, created the very conditions that he fears. NATO is more united than ever, with new potential members, Finland and Sweden. A resurgent West is remembering its values and rearming quickly. And Ukraine, strong like never before, a nation emerging from the amnesia of history and from under the yoke of centuries of imperial domination. Is Putin the architect of his own destruction? And will his hubris be his undoing, like in a classical Greek tragedy? Welcome to the Silicon Curtain podcast. Please like and subscribe if you like the content we produce. It will really help to increase the popularity of our content in YouTube's algorithm. Edward Lucas was one of the first journalists to raise the alarm about Putin's actions and motivations. While most of the world still thought of Putin as someone we could do business with, Edward published a prescient and insightful book in 2008 called The New Cold War: Putin's Threat to Russia and the West. Edward Lucas is now a full-time Liberal Democrat and a prospective candidate for the cities of London and Westminster constituency on a platform that includes defending democracy against dirty money and corruption. He is a columnist for The Times and has been a senior editor on The Economist. Edward is a senior fellow at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. So let's dive into the first question. Russia's war does not seem to be going in its favour, does it? And to address our intro, is Putin's hubris his undoing in this war?
It is always dependent, when you're talking about hubris, about how it ends. And if you get it right, people say that was brilliant, bold, strategic thinking. If you get it wrong, people say that was hubris and you deserve your nemesis. And I think as things stand at the moment, it looks as though Putin has sacrificed a great deal and gained very little. It's still possible that he will win. He must be placing his bets very heavily on the West, splintering, running out of energy, and both the kind of the moral and mental energy, possibly also the electrons and molecules kind of energy, and putting pressure on Ukraine to agree some sort of ceasefire where he can walk away with some kind of victory. So that's still possible, but it does look increasingly unlikely. So my guess is that this is Putin's last winter, that this is going to be the end of his regime and of Russia's ability, at least in the short term, to menace its neighbours the way it's been menacing Ukraine.
Now, if I was a bookmaker, I'd be certainly changing the odds on Putin with the announcement this week that Germany, France, the US, and now a rumor today that Challenger tanks are in consideration with this new sort of heavy metal potentially being delivered to Ukraine. This must make Putin's situation far more bleak.
Yes, I think Putin thought that the threat of escalation would be enough to deter the West from providing serious help for Ukraine. I think he also thought the threat of energy cut-offs would be enough to deter the West. So those were the two big weapons he had. If you don't, if you help Ukraine, you'll freeze, and if you help Ukraine, you'll fry. And both the freeze and the fry haven't really worked. That we've got over this worry of Russia waving the nuclear kosh, and we've survived the energy kosh. And now, as you say, there is heavy metal going into Ukraine. I add a couple of words of caution on this, that what these different weapon systems create is an enormously complicated logistical issue of how do you get the spare parts and the munitions and the fuel and all the other things that they need. And it's very easy to declare that an impressive sounding weapon system is going to the front. Actually making sure it works when it gets there and continues to work is quite difficult. And I hope that the headline support from the West will be matched with all the logistical support that's needed. But the fact is, Ukraine is getting stronger in military terms by the day. Where it's getting weaker in terms of its own energy system, I think there's a chance that the West can help cushion the blow. It doesn't seem like these Russian attacks on the electricity and power and heating are proving decisive. And although Russia's getting stronger in one sense through the mobilization which Putin announced last year, and that brings more troops onto the battlefield, it doesn't look to me like that gives Russia a decisive advantage.
And of course, it's a huge turnaround from the start of the war, where, listening to the accounts of Arestovich and others, I mean, they really didn't believe that Kyiv would hold if we go back sort of 10 months. And in the spirit of all sort of, New Year reviews, what for you was the most sort of surprising and significant developments last year on both the Ukrainian and the Russian sides?
I think the overwhelming lesson of the past year is if we'd done at the beginning of the year what we ended up doing at the end of the year, there wouldn't be a war. And there's far too much Western backslapping and far too little Western contrition, both in terms of our strategic naivete of the last 30-something years towards post-1991 Russia, but also in our unwillingness to supply Ukraine with weapons that would have made a decisive difference if we'd given them earlier. Now, obviously, Ukraine's ability to absorb Western military aid has improved over the year, but the fact is, if we had done a big NATO exercise in Ukraine in January, there probably wouldn't have been a war. Russia would have complained that we're being provocative, but it would have backed off. And the story of everything we've done in Ukraine is it's always a bit too little and a bit too late. And tens of thousands of Ukrainians have paid with their lives. Hundreds of thousands have paid with mental and physical trauma. And we have the biggest refugee crisis in Europe since 1945. And that is basic. I mean, although Putin obviously is to blame because it's his war, the West is to blame because we've created the conditions which he could do that. And we still, I think, have failed to appreciate the depth of our strategic and tactical failure in that regard over the past months and years.
No, that's a view shared by a lot of people, including Ben Hodges, who I think is one of the so-called good generals. Another point of view that has been shared is that somehow the West fears a decisive win by Ukraine and in some ways fears a collapse of a world order that they've become sort of used to, which is of Russia being an influence in the world.
Yes, I wouldn't put it quite like as a sort of fear, but I think that we have failed to think through the consequences of Ukrainian victory and Russian defeat. I would say we've also failed to think through the consequences of Ukrainian defeat and Russian victory. So we have a sort of ad hoc idea that we want Ukraine to win, but perhaps not too much because we're worried about the disintegration of the Russian Federation and we have no idea what will come after Putin. And I think we need to have a clear-eyed assessment of the dangers of this. I think whatever comes after Putin will be worse. And although a defeated Russia will be less difficult to deal with than a victorious Russia, which would be an absolute nightmare, a defeated Russia will present very serious challenges. It will be a failing state, if not an actual failed state, and it will be a rogue state, perhaps much closer to North Korea or Iran than the Russia we got used to dealing with in the Putin era. And that's going to be a big test for us. We need to safeguard Ukraine, we need to reconstruct Ukraine, and we'll need to contain and constrain post-defeat Russia. And there's some very important strategic thinking going on this in places like Lithuania, but there's not nearly enough going on in Brussels, Berlin, Paris, London, or Washington.
Dare I say as well, listening to the Russian opposition, and I haven't had the chance to put this to any of them. It's quite difficult to actually get hold of them. It seems to me the Russian liberal opposition is too toothless and at the moment too involved in sort of internecine disputes to actually present an effective front to nationalist forces that are actually gathering in Russia, as you say, potentially far-right and extreme nationalist forces to take over. And that is one of the interesting aspects of last year, is the emergence of military telegram channels in Russia, many hundreds of them, some quasi-state supported, some actually anti-Putin. I mean, that is kind of ignored by the Western media, but it's a terrifying prospect, isn't it?
Well, and for a start, I strongly suspect that at least some, and possibly most of these telegram channels are very clever psyops done by our side, because if you're trying to sow fear and uncertainty and doubt within the Russian context, having channels that appear to be channeling the dissident or dissatisfied members of the defense and security and intelligence establishment is a very good way of doing it. And this is exactly the playbook we had during the Second World War with Seft and Delmer, who ran what sounded like military radio stations channeling Hitler's propaganda, but with a good mixture of disinformation thrown in. And I would be delighted if we were doing the same, and I hope we are. I think that there is a lot of discontent, particularly on the nationalist right, that the war has been fought incompetently, and one doesn't need to go on to anonymous telegram channels to see that. One can just tune into people like Strelkov, Gierkin, as his real name is, the military blogger who was a leading figure in the Russian-backed separatist forces in eastern Ukraine before the latest Russian invasion. I think that these forces are biding their time. They are, I think, aware that the war's bad and needs to be brought to a close. And I think Putin's final sort of role in Russian politics will be to be the scapegoat for the war that he launched, almost a bit like Tsar Nicholas II, as being the scapegoat for the First World War. And there will be a very painful ceasefire deal, a kind of Brest-Litovsk, to pursue the historical analogy, which can be blamed on Putin. But that will also allow the Russian military to retreat without disintegrating completely and be in at least some sort of position for whatever comes next. These are the things that the West has not yet thought through how to deal with. I would be very cautious about talking about the Russian liberal opposition as if it's a thing. For a start, it's, as you say, very fragmented. I think there's also the danger of it being co-opted. And if we get some kind of military junta taking over, I think one of the first things they'll look for is some plausible liberal seeming figure to talk to the West and say, let's have a reset. And it may well be that some member of the so-called opposition will be co-opted or conscripted or cajoled into fulfilling that role. I think that one of the lessons of the 1990s and the late 1989 era is that dissidents may be conspicuous in a sort of revolutionary moment, but they're very easily co-opted by other forces. So we saw that in Romania, where there was basically what pretended to be a democratic revolution was basically a putsch of one lot of hardliners getting rid of another lot of hardliners. We saw this in Russia, where the democratic forces in the early 90s basically were used as cover for a return of the old KGB. We've seen it in many other East European countries as well. So I'd be very cautious about placing my bets heavily on the Russian liberal opposition, however admirable some of them are, or may seem to be as individuals. I'd also point out that there's a strong streak of liberal imperialism in this opposition. These are people who are passionate believers in democracy, but still think that Ukraine's not a proper country, and think that it's perfectly okay to go around the former Soviet Union speaking Russian wherever they go, and that everybody should be grateful to see them or will be happy to respond in Russian. And that's a kind of unconscious imperialist bias, which is very deeply baked in to a large slice of this liberal opposition, is one of the reasons why they're not always greeted with open arms among people who've experienced the sharp end of non-liberal Russian imperialism.
Absolutely. And another aspect which talking about the sort of struggles between the elite that you mentioned there, I mean, a lot of people have been falling out of windows and having extremely unfortunate accidents around the world, Russian oligarchs especially. And of course, the first conclusion that the media jumps to is that, you know, this is all the FSB. But actually, someone I spoke to last week suggests that actually this could even be, you know, different factions fighting amongst themselves for ever scarcer resources within Russia. It's like a sort of bun fight as the amount of money available starts to shrink and dry up.
Yes, I think that's a very powerful analysis, that you've got there's many reasons why you may fall out of a window. One of them is that the Kremlin doesn't like you. Another is you've got something that somebody else wants. And it can be these sort of business / gangland feuds can be settled on a very violent basis. I also think it's possible that some people are genuinely just in despair. And if there was a big choice that people could make in the 90s and noughties about whether to bet that Russia was going to become a normal country and try and build a quasi-normal business there, or you go abroad and abandon Russia and take your luck in the West. And the people who went to the West did things like founding Google and plenty of other examples. And their choice now looks vindicated. And the ones who stayed in Russia now have to deal with the fact that Russia's not going to be a normal country in their lifetime, that their wealth and safety within Russia depend on the whim of the Kremlin, and they're very vulnerable. And I think there is a sort of nihilistic despair among sections of the Russian commercial elites. They never really took politics very seriously, thought they could get away without having to deal with that, lived in this sort of charmed life of the Moscow wealthy, with all its fantastic restaurants and holidays and everything. And now it's all come crashing down. And they think we're too old to start again in the West, and they're very gloomy. And I can quite see that those sort of gloomy thoughts might be enough to tip some people over the edge or over the windowsill.
And speaking to Owen Matthews last week, he said something very similar, which is that there are a lot of people who ostensibly in Moscow don't seem to be touched by the war. They're going out, walking the park, going to restaurants, etc., etc. But if you cut beneath that surface, there is a lot of fear, loathing. There's a lot of people who are also trying to sort of put their heads in the sand and pretend none of this is happening.
Yes, well, they've been pretending that none of this is happening ever since the 1990s. And for a long time, you could. And I had plenty of Russian friends who just said, I don't bother politics and politics doesn't bother me. And I do this. And maybe you pay off the mafia, maybe you pay off somebody else, but you basically, there's friction in your business life, but you educate your children abroad, you have nice holidays, you have a lot of money, and you just get on and make the most of it. And you be a patron of the arts, you have a respected, happy position. And that bubble is getting smaller and smaller and smaller all the time. And it's not least that people are subject to sanctions. And when they turn up, their credit cards don't work anymore, and they can't get visas to the West. And, you're faced with a choice between Belarus, Tajikistan, Georgia, where things aren't terribly welcoming, probably can't get to any EU country, maybe there's Dubai or somewhere like that. And you feel slightly sort of hunted and despairing, and nobody's going into bat for you. Nobody is saying, you poor thing, it must be so awful for you now. Your lovely life in Moscow has come to an end. People are very welcoming to Ukrainian refugees, quite likely. Nobody's particularly welcoming to members of the sort of Russian upper middle classes who find that most doors are closed to them.
I mean, that's one of the extraordinary ironies. I spoke to one Russian YouTuber who's now living in Uzbekistan, and the idea that Russians could flee to Uzbekistan, which until recently was a sort of neo-Stalinist police state, and they actually feel more free in that place than Russia is an extraordinary turnaround. But perhaps Belarus has sort of pointed the way, because Belarus has been a sort of experiment in tyranny, hasn't it? Conducted by Putin. He's been trying out techniques, surveillance techniques, torture techniques, opposition control techniques in Belarus, which of course now are unfolding in Russia itself.
Yes. Well, I think Belarus is a very interesting case, and it's, in some senses, a little bit freer than Russia. In some sense, it's less free than Russia. I know there are Russians who say my plan for the moment is to go to Belarus and live quietly in Belarus, keep my head down, and wait for things to change. At least it's better than being Russian. You're less likely to be conscripted, for example. And I also think that the regime's hold in Belarus is pretty fragile. They came quite close to a popular uprising with the rigged election a couple of years ago. And I think that if Putin tries to use Belarus as a weapon against Ukraine, that weapon may break. And it might be that if the Belarusian army was told to attack Ukrainians, they might turn their guns on their own officers or just run away or something. So I think it's actually quite a fragile point.
And that same point, perhaps, I don't know if it can be made about Russia with the same force, but there are rumors that another 500,000 mobiki or conscripts are about to be sort of called up in more of a sort of clandestine conscription. And there are videos already surfacing of people receiving and burning those conscription papers. This act of Putin of throwing yet more people into the meat grinder, is this going to push Russia to some kind of tipping point?
Well, it's a bet for Putin. There's, from a military point of view, quantity has a quality all of its own, and I think there was a Finnish proverb that one Finn is a match for 100 Russian soldiers, but what happens when they have 1,000? And you can there is a ability to hurl troops into battle, which we saw with Stalin's ability to create hundreds of new divisions and conscripts, often who didn't really even have rifles. They were just told, take a rifle from a dead man, and then keep going the direction he was going before he was killed. So there's a sort of brute force attack, which is however much we help with sophisticated weapons, it's a problem. But I think that actually, as Krugman was arguing in the New York Times the other day, I think the arithmetic actually favours Ukraine right now. And although it does give Putin some military advantages, this chilling phrase of adnarazovi, the disposable soldiers, every one of them has a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a loved one, sometimes children. And it's gradually deepening the footprint of the war, which at the beginning was something that won't affect ordinary Russians. And now the new narrative is this is a common sacrifice. But that raises the stakes for Putin. There better be some result for it. And for now, he's getting away with the idea that Russia is under attack from the West. We're fighting NATO. We've all got to tighten our belts. It will be horrible all round. But with no narrative of victory, only a narrative of endurance, it gradually corrodes his support, which is why I think that he's drinking at the last chance saloon now.
And watching some of the videos of Michael Naki, who's a very sort of perceptive sort of Russian opposition correspondent, I mean, he said that Putin is gearing up to turn Russia into a state of perpetual war, which sort of is very reminiscent of sort of George Orwell's. So 1984. If this hasn't touched people in Moscow yet, then surely a state of total war in the economy and society that will eventually come home to roost for those in Ekaterinburg, Moscow, St. Petersburg, etc.
Yes, I'm always very cautious of the word eventually, and there's lots of people who've ended their careers on a note of failure for predicting that something was going to happen in Russia eventually. And I think that there's the sort of Soviet model was always based on the extensive use of resources. You hurl steel and coal and people at industrialization. At the end, you get an industrialized country, all those enormous sacrifice. And so I think that there's potential for Russia to mount more offensives, and these will, in this war of attrition we have, that will lead to more horrible casualties on the Ukrainian side. But I think there's one extra element here, which is that it's difficult for Russia to concentrate forces because of precision strikes. They can concentrate forces out of the range of the precision strikes, but that's too far from the battlefield to be able to deploy them. And as soon as if you want to mount an offensive, you've got to have large numbers of soldiers actually in position where they can actually take part in the offensive, and they've got to be supplied, and that means ammunition and fuel and all the other things which the Ukrainians are getting good at hitting. It's also a problem for the Ukrainians that their concentration of forces are vulnerable too. But I think that if Russia tries to mount an offensive, the danger is this will be like the German Battle of the Bulge or the Hindenburg offensive at the end of the First World War. It'll be an offensive which carries a chance of success, but also where catastrophic failure then feeds straight back to the high command and the people who authorized it, with disastrous results for them as well.
And already a sort of split is emerging, isn't it? The military is not very good at PR, that we can tell. It's extremely competent, as was shown in the lethal strike on the barracks in Donetsk, where hundreds apparently perished. Terrible logistical error in placing those troops next to an ammo dump and letting them potentially use mobile phones, although that may be a way of them to pass blame down the chain to more junior people. But we also see an emergence of an alternative power center, which is the Wagner Group, Prigozhin, and so on. How fearful should we be of a Prigozhin-led, militarized Russian society, or Prigozhin even taking control of the broad strategy of the war?
Well, I think Prigozhin is clearly on manoeuvres and has been for some time. These videos are quite striking. We may recall the video of him talking to conscripts, the one of him talking to his commanders in the middle of the night, the latest one about casualties. I think that as the centre gets weaker, the ability of other power structures to challenge the centre, whether it's Kadyrov and his Chechens or Prigozhin or someone else, becomes greater. I don't at the moment see Prigozhin as the sort of likely next leader of Russia, not in coming months. But I think that the dynamics are, and it's also well worth asking, why has his offensive in Bakhmut been so unsuccessful? And this is not, he's not exactly Russia's Napoleon, hurling his forces into this meat grinder for no particular strategic objective, and his rather fanciful idea that we need to, Russia needs to conquer Bakhmut because it's got underground, it's got lots of tunnels underneath it, and it doesn't seem to make great deal of sense. So if he looks like a good military commander, it's only because, as you say, the rest of the military has bad PR. I think it's possible he might be an element in whatever junta takes over after Putin, but I think it's also possible that he falls out of a window between now and then.
Yes, he has the characteristic, I think, of a barrier, which the sort of character you want to get out of the way very, very quickly in the event of a palace coup. Now, this may not be the best comparison here, but you share the dubious honour with Margaret Thatcher of being one of the first people in the West to point out that Putin was not exactly an empathetic character and actually flag up the dangers he might represent and the direction he was taking Russia in. I'm now going to ask a question which I think historians and journalists actually detest, but I'll throw it out there anyway. Dictator syndrome, the sort of aging dictator that Putin's become, the sort of paranoia that's only got more intense by age. Does that make a war like this one almost inevitable? Because there's going to be, of course, a lot of debate amongst historians about the causes of the war, etc., the role of NATO. But ultimately, is an aging sort of autocrat like Putin always going to end up in a place like this?
No, I mean, I think it's a great mistake to go into fall into the trap of historical determinism. And there are plenty of aging autocrats who haven't had wars. Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan would be one. Karimov in Uzbekistan be another. I mean, the idea that you have to have a war is because of blind historical forces is wrong, and the idea you have to have a war because of problems of the aging personality is wrong too. In the end, people make decisions; and they could make different ones. So I think that it's well worth looking at why wars happen, and so one can argue about the cause of the First World War, and the cause of the Second World War, and the causes of this war. But there's always multiple reasons, and I would argue that, from my point of view, the single biggest reason we have this war is the West's failure to stand up to Russian imperialism in the past. And if we'd taken a different approach in the 90s or even in the noughties, this wouldn't be happening now, because fundamentally we are much, much bigger and richer. The West has a $40 trillion GDP, and Russia has, and what is it, 3 trillion or something like that. And this is depends a bit how you measure it, but in the end, Russia, if the world, if the big rich democratic countries of the world were sticking together, you would have a billion plus people and a $40 trillion GDP, and everybody else would be fitting in with our rules. And it's fundamentally because we make appallingly bad decisions on everything from globalization through to the war in Iraq, through to the financial crisis, through to the COVID pandemic, that we don't have a position of credible, authoritative leadership in the eyes of the rest of the world, and we are constantly arguing with each other, so that even when there is something we could do that would be to everybody's benefit, we still don't do it.
And this is the real risk, isn't it? Let's assume that Russia loses, which I think is a fair bet now, but doesn't collapse. There are many in the West who I fear are just itching to get back to business as normal, to normalize Russia, to downplay the idea of Russia as this empire hiding in plain sight, and just go back to the way things were. I mean, that has got to be the most catastrophic outcome potentially of this war.
Well, no, the most catastrophic outcome would be a Russian military victory. And I think you're absolutely right. There is a danger, and it's the thing I worry about most, is that Ukraine wins the war but loses the peace. That once Russia is on the back foot militarily, the West then says, great job done, let's not humiliate them. And we get something that a political settlement to the war, which is short of the full Russian defeat. So we don't get a Brest-Litovsk sort of settlement. We get something, and people say, no, it mustn't be a Versailles because that'd be very bad. And we are then, Russia's able to walk away saying, at least we got something out of this. And that will then maintain the imperialist narrative and the idea of Russia as a sort of as a country that can only be happy as an empire, with grave dangers then, whether it's for the Baltic states or Ukraine again in a few years' time or whatever. So I think that there is a serious danger that we don't understand what victory means, and we don't get the best victory we could. I think the other thing that is very apparent is that Europe is strategically naked without the Americans. And you highlighted at the beginning many of the good things that have come out of this. But I think perhaps the realization in Europe that we live in, it's a rough old world out there. And you can't rely on the Germans, you can't rely on the French, and the Americans may not be here forever. And that's a huge opportunity for Britain. And it's something that's in my political life I'm very keen to push, is that Britain needs to give up its pretensions to be a global security power and focus 100% on defending Europe. And in return for that, we should be able to restore our trading and economic relationship and all the other relationships that we lost through Brexit. And I think there's a kind of grand bargain to be done there. But it requires an awareness of a continuing threat from Russia. That is, for now, the big threat we have is dealing with a vengeful, failing, aggressive Russia on our doorstep. In the future, probably add China to the mix, but that is something that Europe can't deal with it on its own. It needs to do security properly and with other people.
And those other people, I mean, France and Germany traditionally being the center of sort of European policy. One of the things I think that is feared perhaps in Europe, if there is to be a decisive Ukrainian victory, that is that the sentiment, the policy sentiment, is going to move eastwards towards the Baltics, Poland, Romania, and Ukraine. And to an extent, I think what you said there is Britain potentially could have extremely strong both sort of military and economic relationships with that new power center in Europe.
Yes, and I think we already see with the Joint Expeditionary Force, which has become one of the most important things in British defence, the appetite among our friends and allies on the continent for our engagement. There's a lot more to be done. So Poland, for example, is not a member of the JEF. I think it should be. I think we've got a big question in NATO about how we do the command structure going forward. Once we've got Sweden and Finland in the alliance, we need proper headquarters, not the kind of spaghetti mess we've got at the moment. And I would argue very strongly that the Northern Command should be based in the UK. That would be a very good sign, including the maritime headquarters for the North Sea and for the Baltic Sea. There's no other, I think, candidate that can do that with sufficient credibility and effectiveness. So I think there's a lot that's going to pull Britain into European security. And there's also all the question of reconstruction of Ukraine, where London as a big financial centre will be play an important role in the fundraising for that. So there's huge opportunities for Britain. I just hope this government has the bandwidth to appreciate them, and I fear they don't, which is one of the reasons why I'm involved in opposition politics myself.
And I think you're going to be one of the strongest voices tackling a sliding back to appeasing oligarchs and corruption in the City of London. I think that's a whole other topic for another conversation, but extremely important. My last question here, and this comes from a quote by Sir Richard Sheriff. He said, "Hitherto the West has been provided Ukraine enough weaponry to survive. What it now needs to do is to provide the equipment and resources required to actually be victorious." Would you share that view? And what needs to be provided to get Ukraine over the line?
Well, first of all, just with regard to the Russian dirty money, this government is failing to get to grips with illicit finance and economic crime. We are nibbling at the edges of the problem. We still haven't come close to doing what we need to do on things like regulating trust and company service providers, so the people who mint these bogus shell companies that are used by criminals and our enemies to get into our financial system. So there's a huge amount to do on that, and that would actually be very good for Ukraine as well, because we can both raise money from freezing and seizing assets, which can go towards Ukrainian reconstruction. It also helps show the bad guys that we're really serious. The prospects for Ukrainian victory are hugely dependent on Russian weakness, and what we really need is, I don't think we need to have a sort of recreate NATO-style armored forces to thunder across the steppe and come to a screeching halt at the Russian, at the Ukrainian-Russian frontier in Luhansk. I think the key thing to do is to degrade the Russian forces to the point that they they mutiny, surrender, or desert, or start looting their own stores and disrupting things. And that means continued pressure on Russian logistics, which is already their weakest point. And I think if you can leave the Russian forces hungry, cold, short of ammo, with equipment that doesn't work, and not getting the sort of and out of contact with their headquarters, then they will disintegrate, and then we are in a position to, and then the military collapse on the ground will dictate the political logic and the diplomatic logic of the settlement. That's my sort of theory, what I want to see in the end game. The danger, as I've said before, is that we get Ukraine to a point where it's winning, and then pull the rug from under them and say, now, come to a negotiated settlement with the Russians.
Yeah, a kind of North Korea style freeze of the border could be a terrifying prospect there. Well, I'm hugely appreciative. This is the second time we've spoken, and the first interview got incredibly sort of positive reception on the channel. Hopefully everyone will enjoy this conversation just as much and get a lot of detail out of it. I'm extremely grateful for your time, Ed. Thank you so much for speaking.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, thank you for your excellent questions, and for your channel features all the people whose views I most value. So it's a very, very good very good contribution to the debate.
Very kind to say so. And Slava Ukraini, thanks so much, Ed.
Yeah. Garam Slava.